This is Louisiana Chemical Association and Louisiana Chemical Industrial Alliance, and today we're here with our annual legislative conference. The impact that the Louisiana chemical industry has on the state of Louisiana is enormous. Talking billions of dollars of revenue generated every year. You're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, both locally and at the state level, for taxes that go for everything from improving our school system, educational system in general, quality of life, and really what we also heard very early on is about how we get our population moving, how we get our state moving is through growth. Growth comes through job creation, and that's where we really spent a lot of time talking about today. Number one, and how we do that, but also some of the impediments that we may be facing as we look forward the rest of this year and into the future, and then what can we do to help solve the impediments?
Well, we're actually two organizations. We're the Louisiana Chemical Association. That consists of about 65 multinational companies that operate at about 100 locations throughout the state of Louisiana. Most of those plants are along a line from Calcasieu Parish in southwest Louisiana, along a line to Baton Rouge, and then south to the mouth of the Mississippi River. They are what we call aircraft carriers. They are huge installations. We have another organization called the Louisiana Chemical Industry Alliance. These are, if you continue the analogy, the ships of the fleet that serve the aircraft carriers. That organization has over 750 members and is continuing to grow. And so those two organizations are joined at the hip. They have two different boards of directors, but they're aligned in their policy and in their principles because they are both dedicated to growing industry in Louisiana and to providing good jobs, either at the plant or for the companies that service the plants.
The economic impact that the chemical industry has on the state of Louisiana, from the number of direct jobs that we have every year, to the number of new jobs which are coming, and even more importantly, to the number of indirect jobs. Dr. Scott today presented his facts and figures for us, which were absolutely astonishing. You're starting to talk about numbers of billions of dollars of economic impact that the chemical industry has. And you look at the multiplier, almost 9 now, meaning 9 indirect jobs for every direct job created is just astronomical. And to understand that we're accounting, right, for 20% of manufacturing jobs in the entire state, just out of the chemical industry, is incredible. I think we also learned quite a bit about the tax exemptions, incentive packages to bring companies in here, and the true importance of this. This is not a minor piece of overall economic packages, but that we as the industry and as individual companies compete not only nationally but globally to bring new jobs and to bring new installations here. And the environment that is in the state of Louisiana, both in terms of working with state officials, working with the Department of Economic Development to provide us things like the 10-year tax exemption on property taxes, are incredible tools, and in a lot of cases they differentiate the offering for a company in Louisiana than they do other states. It really helps us be competitive and continues to bring those jobs, and it's not just that one job, it's the 9 jobs that follow as well.
The Louisiana chemical industry, what a lot of people don't understand is almost everything that we do. People know, though, they make chemicals, but how does that impact me? What we do a really bad job at telling people is how it impacts everything I do. From the moment I wake up, every product I touch, from toothpaste to toothbrush to my shoes, shoe polish, hair, everything I do is dependent on the chemical industry. And the greatest thing, and what people in Louisiana don't understand, is that those products are made here, not anywhere else. The skill sets to make this, the technical knowledge, the chemical knowledge, the technology. We're almost a big IT industry that we happen to make chemicals. It is the best, funnest industry anybody can get involved in, and the world really can't do without it.
In 1999, I'll take you back a few years, we had 34,300 employees at our plants across the state. We had 75 companies operating at 105 locations. In 2009, in just 10 years, we lost 10,000 jobs. 10,000 jobs at those plants. We lost 14 companies. We lost numerous sites, all of those either being closed or moved to offshoring. Since 2009, with the birth of fracking, our organic growth at our plants has grown 5,000 employees. That doesn't count the 20 billion that's coming up out of the ground and the additional 20 billion that's been announced just in the chemical industry. In the LCIA, in 1999, we had the most ever members, 984 members. In 2009, that had diminished to 540. So while we lost 10,000 jobs at the aircraft carriers, we lost almost half of the ships of the fleet that supply everything that we need, a direct correlation. When the plants do well, everyone else does well. Now the LCIA is growing like mad. So many of you in this room, 750 members and just growing like crazy. Part of this astronomical growth has happened because of the incentives that have been offered to these companies to build and to locate here into a welcoming climate that we have in this state for growth. Part of it, of course, is because of the natural phenomenon of fracking. But one of the young men that worked in the governor's office while all of this was being built, while all of this additional investment was coming to the state, and who watched it and helped nurture it, is with us today. He's gone on to other things. He's gone on to help protect this incredible investment and this state in the Congress of the United States. We have a history in this state of electing good people to Congress and for keeping them for a long, long time. And it's my hope that we can do that with the young man who is going to drop in and say a few words to us right now. Our newly elected member of the United States Congress, let's welcome Garrett Graves.
Thank you all very much for the opportunity to be here, and Dan, thank you. And I think that the opening that Dan gave was great because he talked about the manufacturing renaissance that's happening here in Louisiana. And the great thing is that it's not happening in other states. You can go into many other states, and their comparable luncheon could be held in one of the hotel rooms upstairs because there's not the industry in many other states that there is here, and there's certainly not the growth. Paul Sawyer, who's our chief of staff and did a lot of work with economic development in the state of Louisiana, told me that the state of Louisiana now has more economic development projects on the horizon than the entire state of Texas, which is pretty impressive. Now, I'm not sure if that's a statistic that he just made up or not, but it's impressive nonetheless. And so I've been repeating it over and over again. But it really is amazing because it makes Louisiana future much brighter. And so you start looking at that and you say, well, why is it that Louisiana is having this renaissance, having this manufacturing renaissance when many other states aren't? And there are two key themes that you see in a lot of these projects that are on the horizon here. Number one is we have the best maritime transportation system in the United States. We do. The maritime, the water access that you have to areas around South Louisiana can't be beat. And as you know, that access continues up to 30+ states around the United States. You can bring in the raw materials here, or you can export your products back out. And that's really important because it's the most efficient means of transportation in terms of cost. Louisiana has an advantage. And the second thing is that we have readily, inexpensive, stable supplies of energy here. And that's really important, very important, to ensure that you guys have the energy that you need to run your facilities. You know, the last thing is that we have here that they don't have in a lot of other states is we have open arms. As I said a few minutes ago, if you held this comparable meeting in some other states, you could probably hold this luncheon in a hotel room because they don't have a big chemical industry. They don't have a big industrial base. This is a decision that Louisiana made decades ago because of our natural resources here. We embraced the petrochemical industry. And you're an important part of our culture. You're an important part of our economy. And you're the guys that provide the jobs and provide the resources for hundreds of thousands of our citizens. Looking forward, we've got some challenges ahead of us to that growth. We have challenges in seeing that growth continue. And one of them is infrastructure. And I know that many of you who are on the other side of the river know that all too well. The infrastructure challenges we have here, the crossings of the Mississippi River, for example, I-10, I-12, LA1. We've got some fundamental challenges here. We're probably 30 years behind where we need to be in regard to infrastructure planning. But we're working with the state now, we're working with the federal government, and we are addressing this problem head on, and we're working on a highway bill in Washington to ensure that we can get the resources here to address it. The other is the skilled workforce. There was a pivot in education years ago where you saw folks really highlighting and really emphasizing a four-year education. And that's very important, to get a four-year degree or an advanced degree. But that effort was done to the detriment of our skilled workforce, our community and technical colleges, and others. And you have seen a pivot back to recognizing the importance of that. We saw folks in school and deciding early on, you know what, looking at that end zone way, way down the road and saying, you know what, I'm not going to get that four-year degree, or I'm not going to get that advanced degree, so they choose an exit ramp. And that exit ramp in many cases wasn't a very good choice. They became a liability of perhaps our society or our government. But now we're doing a much better job highlighting the importance and highlighting these other options that are available to people, like going technical trades and going to some of the skilled labor trades. I was at Walker High School, just over to the east of here, a few weeks ago, where they actually have a welding program. They have a credit union that the students operate. They have a store. All sorts of trades that they're exposing the students to in high school. They're doing a great job, and I think it's a good model, and there are many, many other great models in Louisiana. And at the federal level, we're having some challenges too, in addition to the skilled labor and the infrastructure that you're facing. At the federal level, we've seen extraordinary growth and regulation that challenge your ability to do your job, and they're game changers in regard to the conditions under which you operate. Things like looking at Clean Air Act changes, looking at the new ozone standard, looking at the Waters of the U.S. rule, the flood risk management standard, the National Flood Insurance Program rates, and many, many other efforts by the federal government, absent of legislative activity, where the White House is unilaterally carrying out efforts that substantially increase your ability to do your job, increase the cost of delivering your products, and make it much, much harder for growth. And we are pushing back. You know, one of the challenges we have in South Louisiana is that we represent probably the second largest petrochemical industry in the nation, and Texas, I believe, is the first. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're pushing back whenever unreasonable regulations are put forth or proposed, and to help make sure that the people that are proposing these regulations understand the impact on the ground from the experts, and that's you in this room. And so as we move forward and continue to move forward and push back on Clean Air Act regulations and push back on unreasonable ozone standards and unreasonable growth in waters of the U.S. or wetlands definitions, please continue to give us input. I'm not going to stand here and pretend like I know your world, know your job, know your industry as well as you do. So please stay in touch with us. It's our job to be a representative, and we can't represent you if we're not talking. Most of your companies in Washington, I will say, you guys have come by the office, you've been great, you've been very helpful in informing us and helping us understand implications on the ground, but don't discount the importance of it. I know many of you sit at home and you throw things at your TV and you say what idiots there are in Washington, and I'll tell you that a lot of them are there. I can confirm it. But I also want to say that I didn't do this job to be part of the status quo. I didn't. I went up there because I want to change things, because I want to be a difference maker. Help us do it. Help us understand these issues, help us understand the implications on the ground, help us represent you. We're moving forward on bills like TSCA reform, which I know it's something that's a priority of your industries. We've just moved a Coast Guard bill, we're going to be moving a highway bill later this year. We're working on legislation regarding the Mississippi River next year to help deepen it and provide infrastructure investments. Share with us your ideas, share with us your priorities, so we can ensure that we're truly representing you as our job entails. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate, Dan, the chance to address you very quickly and on the fly here. And again, it's our job to represent you, so please stay in touch with us and let us know what we can do to help. Take care. The administration, the EPA, has proposed regulations that would establish a new ozone standard that perhaps it appears that Yellowstone National Park could not comply with, much less the state that has the second largest petrochemical industry in the nation. And so what would ultimately happen here is you wouldn't see companies try and comply with the regulation by reducing emissions, because in many cases it's simply unachievable. What we're concerned you'd see people simply move to other countries where you don't have the same standards to comply with. And so it would result in a net adverse impact to the environment. And so it doesn't achieve the EPA's goals. It certainly doesn't achieve Louisiana's goals in terms of economic development and growing employment opportunity here. And so we are pushing back. We're fighting the EPA, helping them to understand the implications on the ground and trying to force EPA into developing more reasonable standards as it turns to air quality.
We have to worry about what the feds are going to do, because the EPA is doing some stuff right now that's very, very harmful to this industry. And one of the things we want to point out, it is so big that this is one of those industries we want to foster. We don't want to harm it. Now, this is the big threat. Here we have some unelected people in the United States that are getting ready to hammer our country, in my humble opinion. I may be overstating that, but I'm from Texas, okay? So there's two big threats coming from the EPA that you people already know about. That's this National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which are now at 75 parts per billion. And so they've been they took public comments through March on reducing that to 70 or 65 or even 60. So they're going to release a decision in October. Now, if you worship at this particular totem pole, okay, then I think this is going to come out bad. I mean, I believe the people in charge worship at a particular totem pole, and they're going to come out with something really, really bad here. And so what does it mean to us? First of all, notice what a great job you've done in terms of reducing ozone. If you look at the ozone, the 8-hour ozone design value was dropped in half since 1980. But what will happen if these ozone standards are imposed is basically all of South Louisiana will be out of compliance. This is under the 65 parts per billion. All of South Louisiana will be out of compliance. Shreveport area up here will be out of compliance. Now, this area in here is basically it's not measured, it's not monitored. And we'll get to the question of why don't they just move up to here. But basically what will happen right down here is if you want to expand, you're going to have to buy a tax credit, ozone credits from somebody else. And nobody else is going to want to give it to you because they want to be able to expand in the future. So what are you going to do? I mean, this is going to be a real serious problem for us. I don't know what they're going to do with Yosemite National Park. Yosemite National Park is going to be out of compliance. Duh, forgot about that one. I guess we're going to go out there and just grind down all the trees. I don't know what we're going to do about Yosemite National Park. It's a very big mystery. Now, you might say, well, why don't those people just move to the central part of the state? I mean, there's plenty of areas there that are white, right? There's no big water there. They got to have the big water to move these bulk products. And so that's really not an option for these firms, as it turns out. Now, what is at risk? Do you remember when I listed to you the companies that Connie and I have kind of put together, that there are 21.2 billion that have not gone vertical yet? There's a lot at risk here, folks. There are 13,180 jobs. These are just direct jobs. These are not multiplier effect jobs that have not gone vertical at risk here. And oddly enough, that when the EPA does their little equation, when they do their little cost-benefit analysis, when it comes to cost, they don't get to put this in there. The loss of jobs, the loss of earnings, the loss of tax revenues to us doesn't get counted. I think that's kind of amusing, isn't it? And even the EPA recognizes that technology does not even exist in many cases to achieve these standards. Now, the other big one that is in the courts right now is the EPA Clean Power Plan. And the EPA wants to reduce carbon emissions at power plants by 38% in 5 years from now. 42% by 2030. NERA says this is going to cost 41 to 43 billion a year. The EPA themselves are saying about 40% of the coal-fired power plants in the United States will disappear. Now, let me just ask you all something non-scientific. Let's just do a poll. How many people in this room think that if you do away with 40% of the coal-fired power plants in the United States, there will not be a brownout problem? I mean, seriously. There is no way you can get rid of 40% of the coal-fired power plants in this country and not have brownouts. That's just going to be a fact of life. It's going to be interesting to see how we say how that's so much better for people. But the other thing is, again, in terms of those companies that have not gone vertical yet, I don't honestly know this company. I don't know who this is, but they have put out a report by state, and they say industrial electricity rates will go up 48% by 2020. So, if you are one of these companies that think about expanding or still looking at Louisiana, haven't even announced yet, you're saying, I can't get the credits because of the ozone problem. 2, your electricity rates are up 48%. Well, why not just go to Asia or go to Europe? Anyway, so that's kind of the problem that we've got here. This is, to me, the biggest threat to what is possibly going to happen here. This is the second largest chemical industry in the United States, second only to Texas, which is also like us. And this is a very high wage industry. The second highest wages in manufacturing are paid in the chemical industry, very, very close to refining, way above the average wage of the people in the state, way above the manufacturing average. And so it has a big impact. Basically what our numbers show is there's almost 250,000 people in our state whose jobs can be traced back either directly or indirectly to the multiplier effect of the chemical industry. So that's about 1 of every 8 jobs in Louisiana can be traced back to this industry. The rank in the country, Louisiana, if you look at both of those NAICS codes together, Louisiana ranks number 3 in the United States, very, very close on the heels of Louisiana. Now, I have a couple of asterisks here, and the reason the asterisks are there is that if you took out NAICS code 326, you took out plastics and rubber, suddenly we're number 2 by a large margin. I mean, the deal is that California has a very, very, very large plastics and rubber manufacturing sector, and that's just enough to kick them up. If you just looked at what we call chemical manufacturing, 325, we're number 2 by well above California. Why do they come to Louisiana? Well, you people are in the industry, you know this. Number 1, you have easy access to natural gas and oil. Our state's the number 2 producer of oil. By the way, we're barely, y'all don't realize we're just barely the number 2 now? You know what's happening in North Dakota? North Dakota surpassed Alaska as number 3. They're about 200,000 barrels a day from us. To show you what happens, what the fracking thing has done. We're number 2 in natural gas production, and the other thing about it is it's easy access. The natural gas and oil, we have enough miles of pipelines in the state of Louisiana to circle the globe 4.5 times. So there's plenty of access here. Unlike North Dakota, by the way, struggles with this very issue. There's very little pipeline access there. The other thing, of course, is the water that's available here, not only for use in production, but also as a major transportation artery. This one of the things that many of the people in your industry need is they need big water. They need the Mississippi River, they need the Calcasieu Ship Channel, because they're moving chemicals. The cheapest way to move some of these bulk chemicals, as you'll see in just a minute, is by ocean-going ships. Well, the ships can come all the way up to that bridge right north of here, which we call the old bridge. We call that the new one, 71. But anyway, the ships can come all the way up to here, and then, of course, the Calcasieu Ship Channel and the Sabine River, which separates the jackasses from the coonasses. And then the other thing, of course, we have, which is very important, is we have the 10-year industrial tax exemption. Listen, I don't care what people, I know there are surveys out there that say taxes are like way down the list in terms of people determining where they're going to locate their plants. Well, let me tell you something. Those are surveys about what people think. Okay? What people do, somewhere in the bowels of your companies, there are people who are accountants. I was sleeping one of them, who are sitting there figuring out the rate of return on investment. Okay? And it turns out to be math, folks. And the T thing in there is a negative to the rate of return on investment. It's math. If you don't, we are always in competition with Texas for these plants. We are always in competition because they have big water too. Okay? And so this 10-year industrial tax exemption has been very important to us, and we'll see a little bit more about that in a minute. When you look at the makeup of the chemicals in Louisiana, this is, again, these data are just 2012. That's the latest we have available in terms of the breakdown. What you'll find is that basic chemicals make up about almost 2/3 of this. So we're making the bulk chemicals. We typically are not making the stage of chemicals that are right next to the consumer. We're making the ethylenes and the methanols and the leans and the other things here that go into the basic chemicals. Now you'll see here a D here across from pesticides. You'll see here a D here across from rubbers and plastics. That doesn't mean that none of it's produced. Obviously there is, but they have disclosure rules. You have to have at least, I think, 5 producers before they can release the numbers there. So it's just a disclosure issue. It has nothing to do with the fact there's nothing, or it doesn't even mean it's an insignificant amount. It's really there. The other thing I want to point out to you here is the international connection. And this international connection is getting ready to really take off for reasons that I'll mention a little bit later on. In 2014, about $8.8 billion in chemical products were exported from Louisiana. 13% of chemical production was exported. And that's about 13.4% of all the merchandise that's exported from Louisiana. Remember, Louisiana is exporting a lot of diesel and gasoline, things from refineries that make up a big part of that, plus grain. We export a great deal of grain. If you look at the trend in this thing, what you will find is that our exports since 2005 have basically doubled. Now, the line doesn't go up in a nice, neat, straight line. You have the Great Recession here, and you have some little nuances here that happened in 2014. But what you're going to see going forward, I think, is this line continuing to go up, because the primary reason we're having this massive expansion of the chemical industry in the state is because we're kicking the behinds of the Europeans, right? And the reason these plants are coming here is the low price of natural gas versus the high price of natural gas there, and we're just, if you look at this pie that represents the total demand, world demand for chemicals, that pie is not growing very much because the world economy is not doing very well. What is happening is our share of that pie is growing like crazy because we're kicking the behinds out of the Europeans here. So I'm expecting as these new plants come on, you're going to start seeing this number continuing to grow. That would be my expectation. And then I was being interviewed a while ago for the television thing, and one of the key points here we want to talk about is the employment, how important you are to employment in the state. 27,611 jobs. That's the combination of the chemicals and the plastics and rubber. That's why that little asterisk is here. And to give you an idea, about 1/5 of the manufacturing employment in the state comes from your industry. And as it turns out, the distant number 2 is the fabricated metals area. There are about 6,500 jobs below it. So it's not like we're really close on with these. The chemical industry is way out in front, as it turns out. Now, it's not evenly distributed across the state. Again, those are Ole Miss graduates. This is a map of Louisiana now. It is not evenly distributed across the state. What you're going to find is it's heavily distributed where the big water is. Okay? You look at this area from East Baton Rouge down to the mouth of the Mississippi River, and then, of course, over here in Calcasieu Parish. You do have some dark areas here in the north. You have some parishes, Caddo, Ouachita, Rapides, where there's less than 1,000, but maybe more than 700 people employed. With the great big numbers here, the great big black, really, really black areas are here where the big waters are. If you look at the 6 parishes in the state, we're going to come back to these 6 parishes in a minute when we talk about the 10-year industrial tax exemption. You look at the 6 parishes in the state that have more than 1,500 people employed. You can see where they are. Here, Calcasieu is number 1, followed by Simpson, Iberville, et cetera. There are actually 55 of our 64 parishes have at least some chemical industry in them. Now, many of the parishes, there's a chart, there's a table in there that tells you where, what the employment is for each one of the parishes in the state. You're going to see a lot of asterisks, okay, and because of the disclosure rules, but we do know that in 55 of the 64 parishes record at least some employment in this industry. On the earnings side, you're going to see almost a mirror image of what I just showed you. On the earnings side, here's what you're going to find. Just looking at wages. The chemical industry is the number 2 industry in manufacturing in terms of the average annual wage rate, $18.25. Now, I've watched this over time because I also do some work for the refining folks, and what you'll find is depending on the year, I mean, that is not a very big difference there, is it? It's one of the, where's my guy from? That's about, what, $175, something like that. What you'll see, depending on the year, chemicals and refining kind of fight out for whoever's in first place. But the main thing is, these are very good jobs. Remember, they're the largest employer in the state, but these are really good jobs. This is not like this is, used to be our #1 employer in the state was Fruit of the Loom. That's not a good plan, okay? Those are the lowest paying jobs in the state. These are some of the highest paying jobs in the state. And if you look at it here, you look at the big difference between this and the average in manufacturing, and then look, it's more than double, more than double the average wage of the person in Louisiana, 116% above the wage of all workers. So these are very good paying jobs as well. If you look at the track, this is chemical industry wages from 1986 going forward, and this is the average wage in manufacturing. And there's basically been a gap that's been around 48 to 50% between the average wage in chemicals and the average wage in manufacturing. It hasn't varied around very much, but the good news is, I mean, this sucker's it's basically been going up. You have the 2009 recession here that hit both of these areas. A little bit of a stopping here, but you can see this gap. The gap has grown between here and here. It's grown from 248 to 589. So the good news is this is a nice, good upward track, and that's what you hope to see in a good, healthy industry. If you look at the earnings, this map looks just like the employment map, doesn't it? Again, the big river areas, okay, are the areas where the biggest earnings are. And again, if you look at there are 4 parishes. Think about this. There are 4 parishes in the state where the chemical industry provides over $1/3 of $1 billion a year in earnings. I mean, that is really kind of an astounding number to me. Now, these numbers here, these earnings here are basically, this is wages and salaries. But you people in the chemical industry create more than just wages and salaries. You create profits, you create rent, you create interest. There's something that economists lump together and call value added. That's all the earnings that are created by the industry. Now, these data come out with the business census every 5 years, and the latest we have reported right now is 2012. And in 2012, as you can see, chemicals, this is the total value added in manufacturing. Chemicals are #1 by a mile, way over refining, as it turns out. Plastics and rubber, again, you see plastics and rubber not very big, but again, chemical, NACE code 325, really big, almost half of the value added. Almost half of all the earnings of all types created in the manufacturing sector come from the chemical industry. Now, what's really important about this, and it's going to be important if you kind of compare the study this time to our previous one. The previous one we're using 2010 data. This number is up 34% in just 2 years. Of course, 2010, we're just getting out of the Great Recession, all right? But this thing is up 34%, which gives you an indication of the expansions that have taken place during that time, plus just the general recovery in the economy. That's going to be very important to us as we go through and see some of our impact numbers. So the impact numbers really grew a lot during this time period. So what we're going to do next is that's the direct effect. Those are the direct wages and salaries and interest, et cetera, that is paid in your industry. Now let's look at what the multiplier effect of that is. And so what we do now is we bring in an input-output table, we plug your numbers into that, and see what the multiplier effect is. Look at these numbers. I mean, these are just off the charts, stunning numbers. Business sales. In the state of Louisiana, there's $69 billion in business sales in our state in 2012 that can be directly traced back to the existence of the chemical industry in the state. $14 billion, almost 11% of all the earnings in Louisiana are here because of the existence of the chemical industry. I want you to remember this $14 billion because we're going to come back to that billion number in just a minute. A quarter of a million jobs in our state can be traced back. Basically, if this was not all chemical people, this is just average people in Louisiana sitting in this room. here's what you'd find. Every 8th person in a row, their job is traced back to this industry. So one of every 8 jobs in Louisiana can be traced back to your industry. This is a really, really big number. And that number is up a lot, I will tell you. If you compare it to 2010, it's up for 2 reasons. Number one, remember the value added is up 34%. You're producing a whole lot more than you did the 2 years prior to this. But the other thing is the new input-output models, the multipliers, the new input-output models are showing that y'all have a whole lot more people in the state of Louisiana that you're working with, sending out feelers to, that are being impacted by you, than was the case in 2010. In fact, if you look down here at the bottom, who are the big industrial sectors that gain from the presence of the chemical industry in the state? Manufacturing, which is where the chemical industry is. So there's a lot of fabricators gain. Healthcare, retail, very, very big. There are 9 other sectors in the Louisiana economy that get over 5,000 of their employment is due to the presence of this industry in the state. I might mention this right here. Now, our company's done probably 150 multiplier effects or impact studies over time. You typically don't see numbers this big. This is a big number. As a matter of fact, it almost makes you step back and say, well, wait. Well, there's something wrong with our numbers when we see a number this big. Except your industry is really unique. Because when you go, for example, to Exxon Chemical out here, you will find that there about, as I recall, about half the people are wearing a shirt that says ExxonMobil. Another half are wearing a shirt that says Turner Industries, or it's showing performance contractors on it. A lot of you folks have over time subbed out a lot of the work in your plants. And as a result, those direct numbers, that 27,000, that's just the people that are wearing the ExxonMobil shirts or the BASF shirts. Tax impacts, let's talk about one of the nice things about this is there's a lot of money coming into the state budget, to the state treasury because of this. If you look at the taxes collected in 2012, now we had to use the 2012 because that was what we're doing the multiplier effect of. That's when our multiplier effect numbers go. Corporate franchise taxes, you folks paid in about $8 million. This number is a 0. This number, according to the Department of Revenue, there's no corporate income taxes paid by this industry. Couple things about that point. Number one, this is 2012, so you still have a lot of loss carry-forwards during the Great Recession that you can count off. Number two, you have the inventory tax credit that's happening here. Let's bring those numbers down. And thirdly, this is not just you guys. If you look at corporate income taxes from 2008 to 2013, down 61%. I mean, the corporate income taxes have just gone through the floor across the board, not just because of you guys, because everybody have these loss carry-forwards and the inventory tax credit and a lot of other things that have been going on. So there's no number there. We don't have any number on direct sales taxes collected. Now, this is the really big number here. Do you remember the numbers show that you folks create through the multiplier effect, about $14 billion, remember that $14 billion number? Well, the folks at the Legislative Fiscal Office will tell you that for every dollar of earnings that you create, the state collects 7 cents. So if you multiply 7% times that 14 billion, you get this number here. Almost $1 billion is created from the jobs and the earnings that the people earn from working for you or through you through the multiplier effect. So we're talking here about a total of almost $1 billion in the state budget that comes in. And that does not include any direct sales taxes that you pay. Now, kind of a reference point here, $1 billion. The total amount that the state collected from corporate income, corporate franchise, gasoline, special fuels taxes in that year was a comparable number to that. So this is a really big number, obviously. On the local government side, you're a big factor for local governments as well. Now, there's a couple areas. We don't have any data on the direct sales taxes you pay. But what we do have is we do have data on property taxes you pay. Our data on property taxes come from 2 places. Number one, a survey was sent out to you folks about how much property taxes you paid in that year. Number 2, all of your assessors, I contacted all the assessors in the Big River areas, plus some others. And they gave me a list of the property tax collections by company. They can do that. That's part of the public record. And this is based on a survey. This is not a census. So you folks pay at least $121 million a year to local governments through the property tax. And then Dr. Jim Richardson, who is the second best economist you can get to come and speak to you on this issue. Richardson has estimated that for every dollar of new earnings that's created in the state, that you create in the state, local governments collect about 5 cents. So if you take that $14 billion I talked about before, multiply it by 5%, you get about three-quarters of $1 billion. So in total, again, over $800 billion flow into the treasuries of local governments. And that is a very conservative estimate because we didn't get all the property taxes collected. And in some cases, these are very large numbers. So we know this is at the very minimum. It would not surprise me if we did a complete census to see this number go well over $1 billion. The chemical industry is really expanding because we are beating the Europeans out because of our low price of natural gas here. And so we're doing very, very good there. And the chemical industry needs big water. It needs the Mississippi River. It needs the Calcasieu Ship Channel because they ship their chemicals out and move them around, mainly by big ocean-going ships. So Lake Charles has a huge amount of expansion going on, as does the Baton Rouge to New Orleans area along the Mississippi River. Just doing great.
On the big issues of the day in our state, both in this legislative session and what we're going to see in the governor's race, the public's not particularly well informed on issues of state finance, the fiscal health of the state, and they offer a lot of inconsistent opinions, which kind of puts the government in a bind. On the one hand, the public says, raise taxes, but don't raise specific taxes. Cut spending, but don't cut spending on things like education, healthcare, prisons, roads. There's just not a lot of wiggle room coming from the public on how the government might be able to respond to these issues.
What did your survey show regarding Common Core?
The public has sort of an interesting take on Common Core. We asked the question in two ways. We asked some people what they think about Common Core in Louisiana, and a small majority, but a majority opposed Common Core in Louisiana. But we asked a different set of people the same question, but took out the phrase Common Core, described it otherwise the same way, and then support jumps for it. So we have 2/3 of the public supports it when you don't call it Common Core, but a majority opposes it when you do call it Common Core.
We did a little experiment. We asked some people about it and we used the phrase Common Core, but we asked other people, different set of people, the same question, but we took out the phrase Common Core. In fact, I can show it to you real quickly. Here we go. Right, so here's the two versions. You know, last few years, states have been deciding whether or not to use the Common Core, which are standards for reading and math that are the same across the states. In the states that have these standards, they will be used to hold public schools accountable for their performance. Do you favor or oppose the use of Common Core in Louisiana? So some people saw that, and then based essentially by a flip of a coin, well, the computer flips the coin, other people saw this version that makes no mention of Common Core. Otherwise, the words are the same. It just subs in at the end, these standards. And what we found is if you call it Common Core, the public opposes it, 51% opposed, 39% support. But if you talk about the same thing, but don't use the name Common Core, it flips. 2/3 support it, and only a little less than 1/3 opposed. I will say, this was I should have guessed, but this was easily the biggest political hand grenade of anything that we pulled on this year.
I think we need to make sure that at the very least, these children who are becoming adults are ready. Unfortunately, in Louisiana and many other states, that has not been the case. Every year, the state spends about $71 million per year reteaching college freshmen. And again, these are the students who have gotten that high school diploma, gone on to college, but we spend $71 million just in this state reteaching college freshmen things they should have already learned when they're in high school. Young people who decide to go into the armed forces, 31% fail the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery in the state of Louisiana, which is one of the highest rates in the nation. And there are many other challenges. I'm sure you see this, and I've spoken with many of you and heard from many of you who have said, this is a challenge. We can't find qualified people to fill the jobs that we have sitting open today. And a big part of the reason I would suggest is that they are not getting that basic level of education, and they're not getting, let's face it, the life skills, the soft skills that they need to show up to work on time, show up sober, and be ready to have a self-supporting, good-paying job. So states looked at this challenge. They've looked at it for a while. They've recognized that part of the challenge is not even in meeting this high expectation of college and career readiness, but states for years weren't even setting that as a goal. They weren't expecting 12th graders who are leaving high school to have a pre-college or a college-ready or a workforce-ready level of education. We looked at every state's goals, also known as standards, and we found that Louisiana's were better than many, but still not near that college and career-ready benchmark. I'll give you some specific examples. The English language arts standards neglected to bring American literature into the curriculum until later grades. There wasn't something that was required. And Louisiana, as in many states, there was kind of this watered down, vague notion of what students were expected to know. So if they're writing an essay, it's about what is your favorite thing to do on vacation, or what's your favorite holiday? Something anybody can write about. You don't need any background knowledge to write something like that. Whereas something more rigorous would be about reading a text and using evidence and making a strong argument to actually back up your point of view and not just say, I had a really great time with my family on vacation. So that's kind of the difference between the old and new sets of standards in English language arts. In math, similar. It was not explicitly clear, and in fact the math standards were probably worse than the English language arts standards, the old ones. It wasn't explicit that students had to memorize their basic math facts. Something I'm sure everyone in this room did was memorize their multiplication tables, hopefully. But it's not something that was explicitly required to be taught in Louisiana public schools. Perhaps as troubling, students were allowed from very early on to use a calculator to solve some of these problems. So you can type in 9 plus 9 or 9 times 9 into a calculator, when in reality you really need to wait until much later on to be using that calculator, because when you get into high school, when you're doing algebra, when you're doing higher level math, you can't be typing that in. You're never going to, it's going to take you 2 hours to do a math problem if you're having to type in every little step into the calculator. It's not something that's practical. Even if everybody's phone has a calculator on it, you still need to be able to actually understand what's going on and not just know how to solve the problem, but understand the concepts behind it. Now, of course, standards are not everything. You can set high goals, and I'm sure you all know this in your industry, but it's not enough to just set goals. You have to actually meet them. And that's what I think is the fundamental misunderstanding about standards in general and the Common Core specifically, is it is not telling teachers what to teach, how to teach it, what textbooks to use, what lessons to assign, what homework to give. And I think that's the fundamental confusion, because Common Core has almost nothing to do with what a parent sees coming home in their child's backpack. So the homework and the textbooks and the lessons that maybe they object to, maybe with very good reason. I think we've all probably seen that, those terrible, confusing math problems on Facebook that people post. And they're right, a lot of times those are confusing, they are bad. But we need to make sure that we understand that those decisions about curriculum and about homework and all of these other decisions are made at the local level, and that's why it's so important for parents to be engaged, not to tell legislators to do something about it, because they can't. If Common Core were to disappear tomorrow, all of these things that you hear objected to would not be fixed, whether it's indoctrination in the classroom, whether it's confusing math problems, or too much of this, not enough of this in literature class. Whatever people have, and again, there are many legitimate concerns in the education system today, but I think all of these things on the conservative side of the spectrum and the liberal side of the spectrum have kind of gotten lumped into this idea of Common Core. And Dan mentioned to me that if you look at polling in the state, particularly among Republicans, I think you all heard this earlier today, there's a 50-point gap between Republican support of high standards, and then if you actually call it Common Core and just say the exact same thing but call it Common Core, it drops 50 points among Republicans. That's amazing.
What is your assessment of Common Core after studying it?
Well, I think it's really just worth comparing the Common Core standards to the standards that were in place in Louisiana and many other states before. And if you look at the English and math standards, which essentially are just the goals and expectations for students, they're a lot higher, they're a lot more rigorous than what was in place before. And so I think this idea of setting higher expectations, reviewing those expectations, and making sure they're doing good things for kids is something that we should really continue to do throughout the educational system.
I think I heard today that Common Core makes a lot of common sense. And I hope that our legislators recognize that standards are important so that our young people can compete against the best in the world when it comes to the jobs of the 21st century.
Quick legislative update. The legislature is going through the fiscal process. We started out with a $1.6 billion budget deficit. They're dealing with that based on some strange rules that the governor has laid out. Basically, if you raise any revenue, you have to offset it by reducing taxes on the other end. So you have to balance it out in the end. That's been difficult to do, and so we'll continue to work through that process. Right now, the magic number seems to be about $800 million in new revenue. That's what they're looking for. The Ways and Means Committee passed out almost $700 million in tax measures. And needless to say, just about 98% of that's on business. So that's going to be the big thing. In terms of where this thing's going to end up, we don't know. We're trying to minimize what impact it has on business. The big issue is at some point the legislature is going to turn to the fact that they can't really solve the structural problem in this atmosphere. And so they're going to look to do something temporary to get us past the elections and into a new governor and a special session sometime in January or February. So under that scenario, there's going to be a lot of temporary taxes put in place. If and when we get to that, we as LCA and other business organizations are spending a lot of time meeting with leadership, both in the House and Senate, and we're trying to minimize some of those tax proposals that they have.
I think it's important to have a balanced budget. I also think it's important to make sure that you don't balance it on the back of business. Business creates jobs. Business we see in our own industry. For every job in the chemical industry, there are over 8 jobs attached to that job in the economy. So when you start adding taxes on to business, especially a business that's trying to expand now that we have relatively inexpensive natural gas, you run the risk of creating impediments to that type of expansion. You run the risk of impeding job growth, and you run the risk of some companies saying, instead of coming to Louisiana, where we might be taxed more than we're taxed now, we'll just go to Texas instead. So you have to be very, very careful how you apportion these taxes to make sure you don't put too many straws on the camel's back.
Louisiana was blessed with abundant natural resources, and whether it's the Mississippi River system that has this great maritime transportation system, or it's the abundance of oil and gas we have here, it's a natural fit. It's a good relationship between the petrochemical industry and Louisiana. It's a huge part of our economy. We're the second largest industry in the nation, and thousands and thousands of jobs, thousands and thousands of families depend upon the industry. And so we've got to make sure that we're continuing to work with the industry. Right now, we have an estimated $100 billion in new projects on the horizon. That's going to be thousands and thousands of new jobs. It's going to be billions of dollars and more money in our economy. That benefits the whole state and, quite frankly, the nation as well, because we actually won out some of these projects against other countries.
The economic impact to Louisiana is unbelievable. In 2020, 80% of the world's going to run on hydrocarbons. In 2040, 80% of the world's going to run on hydrocarbons. It's everything that we do. The economic impact of the state of Louisiana is huge. Do you realize for every $1 they spend in the chemical industry, there's $7 of benefit to the cities and towns and people of Louisiana? That's unbelievable. So when you hear of $1 million expansion happening, that's $7 million of impact to you and me and to the dry cleaners and the bakeries in our community. That's what's so awesome.
It's an enormous impact on the state. If you took the entire manufacturing sector, if you had a pie that everything manufactured in this state fit into that pie, the largest piece of that pie, in terms of the value added in the manufacturing process, the largest piece of that pie would be chemical manufacturing. So our impact is enormous. We ship about $68 billion a year worth of products. That's $10 billion more than we shipped coming out of the recession. And so the impact of the industry is growing. About $8 billion, almost $9 billion of that, we ship overseas. And so a large percentage of what we make in Louisiana goes into international commerce and is competitive around the world, be it China, other parts of Southeast Asia, South America, Mexico, or Europe.
People need to understand, and I think they do. I just think if they would talk about it a little bit more. We need to talk about what we're doing. We need to talk about the job opportunities. We need to talk about anything you want to do, any level of schooling you want, any level of working your hands, any level of any type of work you want to do. It can be done in this industry. No matter what you want to do, no matter what God gave you, what craft He gave you, you can do it in this industry. And I challenge everybody to get out and do it. Come to work with us.
The people that work at our plants make an average of $95,000 a year. That's soon going to be bumping $100,000 a year in salaries. That doesn't count benefits. That's in active salaries. We have about 29,000 people who are working at our plants now, day and night, 24/7, operating them safely, environmentally sound ways, and secure ways. We have about $20 billion of additional investment coming out of the ground right now that within the next 2 to 3 years will add another 15 to 20,000 jobs. Then we have another $20 billion behind that's been announced that will likely come, but even if only half of that comes, that's another $10 billion on top of the $20 billion. So the job growth is going to be spectacular. The ripple effect in the economy in terms of taxes paid by all of the people who are getting paid good salaries, sales taxes, and all of the equipment and machinery and all of the activity that goes on, that type of impact is going to be stunning. And so the chemical industry has a very, very bright future in Louisiana, and we're very, very proud of the men and women who are helping to make that future a reality.
I'm very encouraged. Number one, we're a very cohesive group in our industry. We are focusing on workforce development. How can we contribute to educating and bringing along the workforce of this state to fill these jobs? These jobs, by the way, which have an annual salary well in excess of $60,000, $70,000 per year, which are incredible income earners. We don't have enough skilled people today to fill in all these jobs. And if you look at the $20 billion in new projects that have already been completed or in startup, we're also looking forward to another $20 billion worth of capital investment coming and the potential for another 13,000 direct jobs. Once again, when we learn about that 9 times multiplier, you're talking about then 100,000 jobs following that. We are a huge economic engine for this state, and we look forward to continuing to work with legislators, work with our association and our colleagues here to drive growth in Louisiana.
If people have questions like more information, what should they do?
They can just write me at dan@lca.org. That's dan@lca.org. Or they can visit our website, lca.org.